Thank you for listening to this recording of Family Bible Church's Sunday morning message. We pray that God will use this word to bless and encourage you.
I'm twisting things up a little bit as well in that we're doing two sections of teaching, if you would, today with the servant and the son. And so we'll do the Bible reading as we go in the passage. There is toddler church. Sorry, I was supposed to mention that as well. There is toddler church, so if you'd like to do that, you can. All right, we've been studying the book of Luke and looking at it, and recently, over the last couple of weeks, we've been considering then the messianic message that Christ was bringing, and so he's beginning to instruct, if you would, his disciples, and he's beginning to show them that the message that he is bringing to them is not a message that is of the world, but rather it is of the kingdom. It's a kingdom message, not a worldly message. And it's a message that is not focused on self, but it's to be focused on others. And so he begins this by choosing his apostles, the 12. Remember we went through it, that there's the world, then there's the multitude, and then there's disciples. But from his disciples, he's choosing 12 specific ones to be his official representatives. But he turns around to the disciples, if you would, not necessarily the multitude, and begins to give this teaching to them. And so over the last two messages, we specifically talked about that instruction that he was giving to them. And that was if you remember the contrast, there were the blessings and the woes. Blessed are the poor, woe to the rich. Blessed are those who weep, woe to those who laugh, right? And then we talked about how these things then look out as we play out, and then Chuck last week brought in even more of the implications of it and the instruction coming from it, and how we're not supposed to judge others, we're not supposed to condemn others, rather we're supposed to be loving others, and we're supposed to be considering one another in that. But all that, if you would, is then, as Jesus stated at the end, all that is a matter of if you really are his disciple, if you're really following his teachings. That those who are following his teachings, if you would, he likened to a, what? Wise man who was building his house on the rock. Good job. That's exactly right, okay? And the rains came and beat upon it, and at the house on the rock, what? Stood firm. You kids know this one, right? Okay? And so, but the man who doesn't listen to the words of Jesus is like what, Jesse? He's a foolish man. That's exactly right. And when the rains came and they came down and the flood went up and it beat upon the house, the rock and the sand went smash. All right, all the kids together, smash. That's exactly right. Okay, it's a great song. Okay, and so, because of the fact, it gives a simple truth, doesn't it? That's what our lives are like. And so, do we want our lives to be ones that are built like on a rock? And when I talk in this passage, and if you go to the series on Matthew and I go through this passage, I have pictures of two houses, two cabins up in Canada. For years I led men's retreats and father-son retreats in Canada, where the Awana had a camp up there. And there's a green cabin that was built on a sandbar. And it was way back. But over the years, with the freeze, because up in Canada they had the big snow freezes, and then all of a sudden it washes away, that became apparent that it was just a sandbar and not an island. And then it went back and back and back. So I have pictures over the years of this cabin, that how its front yard, if you would, shrunk. And then all of a sudden the front porch is hanging down, and then the cabin was dragged back and the front end of it was cut off and stuff like that. But all along the same while, upriver, about 5 miles upriver further, on the other side of the river, there was a red cabin. And that cabin was built on a rock. It was built on rock. And every year, guess what? It was in the same exact spot. It never moved. They weren't dragging that cabin back. And so if I think, I haven't been up there for now, 7, 8 years, I imagine if I go up, that green cabin may be gone, because that there was not a whole lot left on the sandbar. That used to be a big island, but it was a sandbar. And so it may not happen immediately. It may happen over what? Time, over years. But the reality is that if you're building your life not on Jesus Christ, not on his word, that your house is going to be like that cabin. And so we can pretend, and we can justify, and we can pull the cabin back a little bit, and think that, well, we're still doing okay, but eventually there's not going to be any sand left. The sandbar's gone. Whereas if I'm building my life on the word of Christ, then it'll always stand. Now, Jesus is going to take those teachings, this repent for the kingdom of heaven, to change the way you think stuff, and he's going to now bring it into his own life, and he's going to live it out, and he's going to give us an illustration. And I think that's what Luke is doing now as we transition into chapter 7, verses 1 to 17. He's going to give us an illustration of how this looks in an interaction that Jesus has with the centurion, Roman Centurion of Capernaum, regarding his servant, and then how it looks when he interacts with a widow of Nain, okay, regarding her son. Because again, these two passages, these two portions are going to be slammed right next to each other, but Nain is a distance away from Capernaum, okay? So this didn't happen, boom, boom. There's a moment in between it. But I think Luke is bringing these together, again, I think, to highlight what Jesus just taught everybody, okay, about not judging, not condemning, loving, being kind, and how you do this, and what does it look like when you're living it out in your own life, okay? So we want to begin with the teaching regarding, and then I had about Romans 12. We'll skip that. The teaching on the healing of the servant. So I'm going to read from Luke chapter 7, and I'm going to read verses 1 down to verse 10, okay? It says, now when he concluded all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant, who was dear to him, was sick and ready to die. So when he had heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom they should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. Then Jesus went with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore, I did not think myself worthy to come to you, but say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to the one, go, and he goes, to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And those who were sent, returning to the house, found the servant well, who had been sick. Well, the first thing we see is in this passage is this centurion who sends a delegation to Jesus regarding the healing of his servant, okay? And so the first thing we see is his concern. So this is an interesting, important thing to me, because if we were to sit here and talk, and we were just discussing outside of this passage, and I was going to tell you about a Roman centurion in Capernaum, would you think the Roman centurion in Capernaum would be a nice guy or a rough guy? A rough guy, okay? I mean, he's a Roman soldier. And he is the leader of 100, okay? So he's the ruler of 100 of these soldiers. So he's got to keep these guys in line, okay? Roman soldiers were not necessarily known to be sweet, soft, kind of guys, okay? And so, but the first thing we see about this Roman centurion is that he has a concern for a doulos. Now, we read servant in here, but literally he is a doulos. He's a bond slave. He's not an oikonomos, which is a steward of a house. So like, for example, like if you had a butler or something like that, a servant that way, he'd be an oikonomos, okay? He could be a diakonos, where we get our word deacon from, okay? A minister or a servant that way. But he's not that either. This guy is literally a slave. He's a bond slave at best. And this Roman centurion cares about him. To me, that speaks highly of this Roman centurion. He cares about those who are in his household. Why? Well, we're told that the doulos was of great value. It says he's dear, but literally in the Greek, the word is intimos, okay, intimos. And so is timos, honor, or value, worth, okay? And so what he's saying is that this servant is of great worth to me. Now, I don't know, we're not told whether he's of great worth because he's a valuable, like Joseph to Potiphar, and he's able to read, and he's doing all these things. I don't know why he's of great value, but he is of great value. And so this Roman centurion looks at this slave, and think about it. The way the U.S. corporations think of the peons who work for them. You're what? You're replaceable. Okay? And so you look at sports. When someone's starting to make a little bit too much money and the edge is coming off them, what happens to them? Contracts aren't renewed. They're let go. It's better for me to pay the $1 million to you for breaching my contract than to pay the $21 million to you. Okay? Because I know I can go out and get another kid who's younger than you and pay them $20 million less than you. Make sense? We tell how much we value somebody, how we treat them. Okay? And so whatever the reason was, this slave, bond servant at best, was to the centurion of great value. But he also had great illness. This is where, again, we come into Dr. Luke, okay, the physician coming in and giving us details about it, which are, talking us about this is a disease that was unto potentially death, okay? Matthew gives us a little bit more detail, and Matthew says specifically that this individual was a grievously tormented paralyticos. And so this servant had a disease that was, in a sense, leaving him paralyzed and tormenting him. And to everyone's understanding, probably to all the physicians, because again, think about it, it's a Roman centurion, so if he wanted to have a physician to come and check out his bondslave, he could have done that, right? And so according to everybody else that's there, this is a disease, this is a sickness unto death, right? So he's going to potentially die. So the Roman centurion hears of Jesus. How do you think he heard about Jesus? This is a no-brainer. Come on. Say again. All the what he's doing. Everybody's talking about him. Again, this is the centurion located where? Capernaum. Where was Jesus doing most of his miracles? Capernaum, okay? But interestingly enough, we're not told that he had ever seen Jesus. He had only heard of Jesus. That means he heard his testimony. People talking about Jesus. Does that make sense? I think it's kind of cool. He has stayed away from the crowds. He's a Roman centurion. But he's heard all of the testimonies about Jesus. And now he realizes that his best chance at this moment to save his servant is what? Jesus. Calling this Jewish thaumaturgist wonder worker. Because we don't read that here, but back in that day, that's what, remember, Jesus is being accused of all these things. Okay? And he's being accused of all these things by the Pharisees and the scribes. If you would, potentially by these very guys who he asks to go to get Jesus. That's what's kind of fun for me at this moment. Because now he's going to send the elders. In his humility, and we know it's humility because he says, I'm not worthy. I didn't feel that I was even worthy enough to come to you myself. So he takes the elders and he sends the elders to Jesus. There's a lot of times I would love to be a fly on the wall and witness conversations that go on. You want us to go where? Do you understand what we think of this guy? Do you understand what we're telling the people who he is? And you want us to go and ask him to come to your house? Now, I don't know that's how it's playing out, but I think it's kind of interesting that he says, I don't feel like I'm worthy, right? So I want you guys to go on my behalf, okay? And then he specifically says that he doesn't consider himself worthy, and he uses two specific words to describe it. First is the word ikinos, which literally means large or great. So he says, I'm not large enough. I'm not great enough. In other words, my position, again, he's a what? Ruler of 100. He's a Roman centurion. In fact, he's powerful enough that he's going to be able to send the Jewish elders to go and represent him. But he says, I don't feel like I'm large enough or great enough to come into your presence. Secondly, he says that uses the word axios. Again, these are coming into the Greek, okay? Whether he used Latin words, whatever, we don't know, but this is what Luke writes for us in the Greek, okay? I'm not fit or titled enough, okay? And so axios is the word that is used in the letter to the Ephesians and stuff, literally to be worthy, to walk worthy, okay, of the calling wherewith you are called. And that is to be fitting, that you should walk fitting of the calling wherewith you are called. In other words, we're called to be representatives of Jesus, and so therefore we ought to what? Walk like it. Well, he's saying to Jesus, I'm not fit enough. I understand who you are. I understand your holiness. And I am not fit enough to come into your presence. I'm not great enough to come into your presence. I'm not fit enough to come in your presence. And this is going to come even further when we talk about his faith. Just these are amazing statements coming from a Roman centurion who's used to probably just stating what he wants to state, and we'll talk about this in a moment, and it happens for him, right? Now, on the other side, in his humility, he says he's not worthy, but those elders who he sends to them, they turn around and say what? He is worthy. This is a worthy guy. Why? He loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. So these guys, though they may not be the ones that you'd ever think were going to come to Jesus on behalf of a Roman centurion, are more than glad to represent this Roman centurion to someone that they may not necessarily themselves individually want to be in the presence of. In their words, bear witness of this nameless Roman centurion. He loves our nation. Think about that statement. What would you say Rome's impression of Judah in Israel was? Not very good. That's exactly right, okay? They didn't like him. They looked down on him. But this Roman centurion loves the nation. In so much that he what? He built us a synagogue, a synagogue, a place where we can come together to worship Yahweh, to worship Adonai. Now that by itself tells you something, because this Roman, if he was a true Roman, he would be worshiping what? A pantheon of God, but then specifically, yes, Caesar, okay? And so, I mean, that's the whole thing about when the accusations come against Jesus, that Jesus is a king who opposes Caesar, right? And so now all of a sudden, he's building a synagogue for these people who are anathema, if you would, to the Roman Empire, okay? And he's spending his own money to build this. I don't know if he's using Roman forces to build it or whatever, but he's the one who built it. Now, it's an interesting thing for me as well, because when we first met Jesus coming to Capernaum, where did we see him? In a synagogue. Isn't this kind of fun? Think about it. He's in the synagogue, and he's healing the demon-possessed individual. And then he comes out and goes to Peter or Shimon's house, right? But a lot of things are occurring in the synagogue. Remember we put the picture up and showed where the remnant was found of where the synagogue is? Isn't that kind of fun? Who built it? The Roman centurion. Isn't that kind of cool? It wasn't Israel, but God used a Roman centurion to build the people this place of worship, in a place where he would come manifested in the flesh, and he would perform many of his miracles. Anyways, to me, that's just kind of fun. I love coincidences, quote unquote, as we see them, and how God is working out details. Those are little details. So think about how this plays out. So he's worthy, okay? And so this leads me, in my mind, to two passages from Proverbs 27. Verse 2, let another man praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. And then down in verse 21, the refining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, and a man is valued by what others say of him. Think of another passage in Proverbs where it says, each will declare his own chesed, his own goodness, but who can find a truly faithful man? And so the reality is that we love to toot our own horn sometimes. But you know when you're around somebody who's full of themselves, okay, that in the end, you don't like to be what? Around them. That's exactly right. But when you're around somebody who's caring about everybody else around them, you love to be around them. Our world's motto is that you've got to take care of numero uno. Because if you don't take care of yourself, what? Nobody else will. But Jesus says you got to take that mindset, flip it up on its head. And the kingdom mindset is totally different. And that is, others are more important than you. So I want you to think about it. So we've got about, 60 here today? Okay. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. If every single one of you cared for yourself, and only for yourself, and you were numero uno, how many people are worrying about you? One. But if everybody here had the mindset of Christ, that they considered others better than themselves and of more value than themselves, how many would be looking out for you? 59, if we're saying 60. Make sense? Because you're not looking out for yourself, you're looking out for somebody else. But 59 others are looking out for you, and they're taking care of you. The problem is, we can talk the talk, but it's hard to what? Walk the walk, right? Okay, and live it out in our lives. Well, apparently this Roman centurion in some manner was doing it. And even to the part where it's his bondslave that he's looking out for. And the people of the city do it. That's extremely impressive for me. Because this testimony isn't coming from him. It's coming from his enemies. Or those who should be his enemies. Okay? So, his faith. This part is mind-boggling. And it's not just mind-boggling to me, but as we're going to see, it's mind-boggling to Jesus, which really it says something a whole lot, doesn't it? Okay? So his declaration of faith. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. You don't need to come. Jesus is going to come. Jesus gets the request. Jesus starts on the way. We'll talk about that in a moment, okay? But he starts on the way while word gets back to the centurion that Jesus is coming to your house. He's going to do it. He's coming. He's going to heal the servant. Whoa, 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 whoa. I didn't mean that. I mean, because I know something about this guy. All he has to do is give the command. Just say the word from wherever you're at. Just say the word from wherever you're at, and my servant's going to be healed. Isn't that pretty cool? Others want to touch Jesus. They want to touch the tzitzit. That's what the prayer shawls would have tzitzits at the bottom. And they just want to touch the tzitzits on the bottom of his garment. That was a Jewish folklore, superstition, that power would flow through the robes of the teacher. And so that's why the woman that we'll see probably later on, who comes with the flow and she just wants to touch the tzitzit at the bottom, because she's believing that this is going to happen, okay? And by her faith, because of her faith, she is healed from that perspective. That's what Jesus said, okay? But she could have believed from a distance. Isn't that kind of something to think about? Okay? And so this guy says, the Roman centurion, this pagan, this Gentile, this one not of the nation of Israel, not of the chosen people, sends word through those who should understand and should know. No. I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. You just say the word, and it'll happen. Do you believe? Do you honestly, really 100% believe that all Jesus has to do is say the word and you could be healed?
I don't think he has to even say the word. He just has to think it.
He just has to think it. That's exactly right. Yeah, 100%. Not the word and what but I'm thinking just using this illustration. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's done. Jesus could have said what to the Roman centurion? No, it's not my will right now. Make sense? We don't read about those occasions. I wonder if there were those occasions where Jesus didn't heal somebody. I mean, we know that Jesus had been in Jerusalem, and then when he goes to heal the man who was born blind at the gate beautiful, it's during one of his final times of being in Jerusalem, which means that he probably what? Passed him by before. Had he passed Bartimaeus before in Jericho? I mean, we read about what these things happen, but there are many other people that Jesus doesn't heal. for whatever reason. Does it make sense? So the Roman centurion understands this. He says, you just say the word, and I know it's going to happen. That goes along then with because of his recognition of authority, okay? There is a necessity for order, because he comes back and he says, I too am placed under authority. I say to this one, go, and he goes. To the another one, come, and he comes, because I have these individuals who are placed under me. There's this concept of authority that God has placed even from the beginning. He created Adam, and then from Adam he made Eve, and he brought Eve to Adam to be his helpmeet. That's brought out again by Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1, with verse 1, with the ranks, if you would, of authority, the hierarchy of authority. That the head of a woman is man, and the head of man is Christ, and the head of Christ is God. There is an authority structure that God has placed, okay? And we're told then, going through 1 Corinthians 11, into that portion when we're talking about the head coverings and that kind of stuff, that a woman ought to wear a head covering, and I believe that's long hair, okay? But that's a different message, okay? But a woman ought to wear a head covering for what reasons? Does anybody remember this? Why should she wear a head covering? Why should her head be covered? Say it louder.
That shows she's under.
Yes, but why? It shows she's under authority, but why? Specifically, what does it say in 1 Corinthians 11? Because of the angels. Because of the angels. Not because of people, not for her husband, not for herself, but because of the angels. Because the spirit realm is looking in on the physical realm, and they wonder at the things that God is doing, and they see the submission of a follower of Christ to the plan of God. Women, you know this. How hard it is, because it goes all the way back to the curse of Genesis chapter 3. That your desire will be to rule over your husband, but he must master you. It's the exact same phrase that's in Genesis chapter 4 when God comes to Cain and says, why is your countenance fallen? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But now sin is lying at your door, now the reverse, and it desires to consume you, it desires to rule you, but you must master it. It's the exact same Hebrew phrase as the curse to the woman. Your desire will be to consume or rule your husband, but he needs to learn how to be a wife whisperer. He needs to learn how to put the saddle and how to take the reins. That's what it says. Just like you're supposed to do with sin. It desires to consume you. It desires to rule you. It desires to master you. But you must learn how to master it. Make sense? How does that apply? I'm not picking on a woman here. Take the concept that I'm drawing. We have to learn the concepts of submission to authority. I could also then go to Romans 13 and talk about how there is no authority that's over us, but such has been given by God. And so when we look at the governing authorities, that God is the one who placed us over us, okay? When we step out underneath the authority structure that God has established, we're actually not stepping out just from that individual, we're stepping out from the authority structure that God had established. Does it make sense? So wives, when you rebel against your husbands, you're not rebelling against your husbands. You get this when we talk about your kids. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. So kids, when you disobey me, you're disobeying God. I mean, when you rebel against me, you're rebelling against God. Well, why is it the same way? When you rebel against your husband, you're rebelling against God. Men, when you rebel against the governing authorities and you don't like that white, I stand here guilty, I'm not picking on you, okay? And you don't like that white rectangular sign, you're stepping out from the authority of God because God established that authority. Whether you like it or you don't like it. God didn't ask you. He didn't ask you whether you agreed with this. God didn't ask whether you like this whole concept, okay? He just did it. And he takes credit for it. So this Roman centurion, he understands this. You guys in the military, you get it, right? I may not like we'll take myself as a lieutenant at the moment and as a platoon leader or whatever, and I'm under the company commander. I may not like what the company commander tells me to do, but as a platoon leader, what am I going to do? Yes, sir. It'll be done. Make sense? And so I too am a man under authority. I say to the one, go, okay? And so this is what this Roman Centurion is saying. He says, I understand authority. I understand the authority structure. So therefore, at this moment, what is he saying to Jesus? Not I'll obey you, but everything's going to obey you. This disease is going to obey you. You have greater authority over everything else. I'm not saying this guy's a theologian and he's really got everything down, okay? But in my brain, I'm almost thinking, this guy believes he's the creator God. Who has the ability to tell a disease from a distance away to be gone or to be healed and for it to happen? He's got some pretty good strong faith going on here in what he understands about authority, right? Well, then he says, then again, yes, that the necessity then on it to obedience. I speak and what? They obey. I speak and they obey. You say the word, it'll obey. He probably didn't even know about the time when the disciples were on the boat and the winds and the waves were beating against them, and Jesus woke them up and he said, oh, you little faith, be still. And the winds and waves obeyed him. Maybe he did. Maybe he heard about something like that. Last week's message, at the very end, Luke 6:46. Chuck brought it out. Jesus says, why do you call me Lord, Lord? And then what? You don't do the things I told you to do. If you're not submitting to God, if even in the things you know, do you understand? How can you call him Lord? How can you say he's your master if you won't do even the basic things that he's asked you to do? So, thinking of the centurion, I wanted to ask itself, what would people say about you? What kind of reputation do you have among those who are in the world? Would they be ready to go serve on your behalf and to give a good word on your behalf because you've got a great testimony in their view? What do you believe about God? What do you believe about Christ that he's able to do? How do you demonstrate it in your own very life? Now, you could say, wow, I believe he can cast out demons. Yeah, I believe it. Well, do you live that in your life? That he has that kind of authority, even over your own life? Well, Jesus then, we go to the response of Christ. First of all, his willingness. Again, as a follower of Christ, I want to learn things from this. Jesus was willing to allow, if you would, I understand the sovereign side of this, and because I'm going to bring this part of it out of the coincidence with the Widow of Nain, okay? So, but are you willing for your schedule to be interrupted by ministry? I know, I'm the paid professional. I'm not. Don't put that on me, okay? It's a calling. It's not a profession, okay? But I know that even having time to do this, to study, and I meet with a bunch of guys through the course of the week, and if you meet with me, you know that, okay? And so, but it's still, I promise you, it's still hard when somebody calls me and wants me to mess up my schedule for them. I mean, what? No, this is my free time. And I just, out of the blue, Jesus has these elders come to him. And again, the elders usually didn't like Jesus very much. And so I don't know about you, but if you got your enemies coming to you and they're asking you for a favor, what's your first inclination? Over my dead body. Yeah, pass. Go ask somebody else since you don't believe in me anyway. Jesus didn't ask that way. He didn't do that. Jesus showed a willingness to serve wherever the opportunity arose. You don't know the seeds that you might sow, the soil that you might till, the seeds you might fertilize or water. God's got a plan and a purpose. In my mind, I don't know whether the servant's going to be healed or not at that time. Make sense? All I know is that he wants me to do what? Go minister to him. That's my purpose. At this moment, I'm going to pray. If God chooses to heal the servant, that's God's choice to heal the servant. That power doesn't come from Bob. That power comes from Christ. Does that make sense? And I go in his authority, and I pray over him, I anoint him with oil, and we trust the healing to God at that moment. But what if it's talking to your neighbor about Jesus? What about a neighbor who treats you unkindly? Are you willing to go when the opportunity presents itself? Well, his willingness, secondly, his wonder. I have not found such great faith, no, not in all of Israel. This is an amazing thing. Jesus is looking at the centurion, and he's just wonders. Now, again, I've got so many things I can't talk about all of them. But this just ruminates in my mind of Jesus emptying himself. Why was he in wonder? He knew it was going to happen, right? I mean, this is part of this is just on the appointment book. The centurion's going to call for him because he knows all things. He's God. Well, in some manner, he allows himself to be emptied, and he is full of wonder. I can't explain it. But you get it. There are things that happen sometimes, and you watch somebody do something, and you go, what? Wow. That's really this is a God moment. This is so cool. I can't explain this for no other way than God orchestrated this, and this is so, so cool. This is one of these moments for Jesus. And he turns around and he says the obvious. Could you imagine what it was like to be part of the obvious? to be part of the crowd who were Israel, who should be the ones believing. And Jesus says, I have not found such great faith, not in all of Israel. I mean, this pagan, this Gentile, this enemy of Israel believes in Yahweh so much, believes in the power of Yahweh so much, that from a distance, he's saying, just heal. You guys are standing here with me and you don't believe. It's an amazing thing. Reminded me then when he was in Nazareth, his own hometown, and he was able to do what? Nothing. Because they what? They lacked faith. And then it reminds me of Luke 18 then, Jesus, and we'll get there 10 years from now. When we get to this is the widow going before the judge, right? And at the very end of this thing, he makes this statement. He says, but when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? Now, a lot of us say we think we're living in the days of Jesus' return. So you need to take that comment to heart. When the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? Not what we want to call faith, but what he wants to call faith. And I ask myself, if I was in Capernaum that day, who would I be? Would I have been the elders, the Pharisees, the scribes, just the basic Jew, Israelite walking there? Would that comment have stuck with me? Or would I have gotten upset at it? And so I have to ask myself, do I honestly really believe that Jesus could do exceedingly abundantly above all that I could ever ask or think? We're going to see some amazing things that Jesus did while he was on the earth. Now, I understand theology. I understand, well, those were signs and wonders that were done in his day, da-da-da-da-da. I think we excuse a lot. I get that part of it. But I think we hide behind our theologies in order to massage our own egos in our own lacks of faith. I honestly believe if Jesus wanted me to move a mountain and cast it into the sea, I could do it. I couldn't do it. He can do it. Yesterday, my quiet time, I wasn't going to bring this up, but this is going to blow you away. It's like, what? If you get my quiet time notes, you know, if you read it, you know where I'm going. This is hard to admit. On tape. I might have done it on testimony time, but now I'm going to do it on tape. My quiet time yesterday came from When You Believe, the song that was sung during Prince of Egypt. And I meditated. I woke up with that song in my brain. And I meditated on that song. in the midst of the song is a Hebrew praise. It's from Exodus 15, verse 1, verse 11, verse 13. It's phenomenal. I cannot believe it's in one of these Disney-ish movies. It's a real praise to Yahweh in the midst of this thing. Shira Ananai, Ki Goaga. Anyways, just praising God for who He is, for His holiness, His majestic holiness, and for His chesed to those who He has redeemed. I mean, this is in Hebrew, so you as listening in English don't get it, but that's really literally. But one of the lines in it is about the miracles. Who knows what miracles that we'll see if you believe. Anyways, but then it goes on. The next line says the miracles that you can achieve, that we can achieve. And that struggle with that one. I mean, I'm sitting there, and I started meditating on this thing. I'm biblically, comparing spiritual things with spiritual things, and I begin to realize, from the world's perspective, guess what? They think we achieved it. We think Paul cast out demons. We think Paul healed people. But he didn't cast out anything, and he didn't heal anybody. Who did? God did. Jesus did. That's exactly right. That's what Peter and Paul, they go up to the man who's lame, right, for 40 years, which means Jesus passed this guy by, because every day he's laid at that gate, right? And so Jesus never heals this guy. Well, Peter and John come up, and they see him, right? And they say to him, silver and gold have we not, but what? Such as we have, we're going to give you. And then they say, in the name of Peter, in the name of John. They don't say that. What do they say? In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And then when they stand before the Sanhedrin, they say, it's not us, it's Jesus. It's the name of Jesus by this thing. Anyways, my point in all this is that do I really believe that I can see miracles happen in my lifetime? That God can use me? Not that I'm going to do them, but that I can be the vessel that God can use to do mighty works that are going to wow other people. Not because they're wowed at Bob, but they're going to be wowed at my God. When I was younger in the faith, I was more bold in that. And I just want to challenge you in that, to not lose the wonder of who God is. Don't become complacent with His power. The same God that did a miracle in your life and in your heart is the same God that can do the miracle through your life. I have watched God work in my family and through my life, and you guys have heard these stories. I'm not going to go into them. That if I choose to turn away from Christ, put me in an insane asylum, okay? Because I've lost my brain. Why do I doubt times then? I have doubted times whether He can use me. He wants to use you. I've got to move on. So I got to work on this remote. So we want to go on to the raising of the widow of Nain's son. Because now we come into this portion in Luke chapter 7. I'll begin reading at verse 11. It says, Now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him in a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and he was a widow, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, He had compassion on her and said to her, Do not weep. Then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, Young man, I say to you, arise. So he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. Then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, A great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited His people. And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. So what do you see? The first thing we see is this coincidence of the moment. Jesus just happens to come into Nain for this moment, okay? Again, I don't believe in coincidences, especially when it comes to God interacting, okay? And so there's important things for us to think about when this all plays out, okay? And so he comes into Nain just as this funeral procession is going to go, okay? And so you got to picture what's happening, okay? He's on top of a bier, however you say that, B-I-E-R, right? And they're carrying him, okay, along in order for him to be buried. Because for the Jewish custom, they would bury him immediately that day. Before sunset, they would dig a grave and they would put him in, okay? That's where, not necessarily from the biblical concept, but that burying him that fast came with the for whom the bell tolls type stuff, is because they would begin then to put a bell, because if they buried somebody alive, then they would be able to move their foot, and all of a sudden the bell starts ringing, and they realize, oh, we need to exhume this individual because they really weren't dead. Okay. So this is a fresh moment. This is a fresh moment. He just died. Do you understand? All the people are there wailing and stuff like that. Kind of, you understand Jairus' daughter, when all this, because everybody's preparing for her to die. Okay, when we get there, we'll talk about that. Okay, so they're assuming she's going to die. Well, this kid did die. So everybody's coming together. They're doing the wailing. They're going out with the funeral. They're digging a hole and they're going to put him in it. So mom, the widow, this is what? This is fresh. This is the moment. This isn't like, okay, she's had 3 weeks and now they're finally going to bury her. Bury him. She's gotten used to it. Didn't happen, okay? So her situation, okay, is this is the moment. Now, think about it. She's a widow, which means she has what? No husband, no financial support. Who's getting ready to be buried? Her only financial support. Her Social Security. Yeah, good. That's exactly right. Her only financial support. Her son, who's going to rise up to stand in the place of her husband. But now it's her only son, right? We're told that specifically. And so she's without any help, without any hope, okay? And so the next part we see is the tender mercy then of Messiah. The word here in the Greek is splankizomai. It's where the splanknon is where we get our word spleen from, okay? It's literally the splanknon is your innards, okay? So if you have a King James and you look at Philippians chapter 2, Paul's saying, if there be any consolation in Christ, if any bowels and mercies, bowels is our word for splanknon, okay? And so you get a kidney punch, right? You get the sucker punch in those innards kind of thing, and it's just going to take you down, okay? Because it's the tender part of your body, and they understood that back then, okay? That this is kind of your gut part was your tender part. So it's splankizomai was the idea of then really being tender towards somebody, okay? So we say, I love you with all my heart. That means you what? You're really tender to somebody. So take the same concept, okay? The splankizomai, okay? And so he looked at her and he ached within himself. Do you get it? He understood the situation. And I ask myself how many times am I oblivious to the situation? Because I am so tunnel visioned, I am so self-focused sometimes that I'm not looking at the people around me. I want to. I ask God to help me out. I mean, and I am overwhelmed when it happens. I mean, I don't know about you, but, walking last weekend with the airport, on Friday and on Tuesday, seeing all the countless people going through Atlanta. But even in Augusta, it's amazing to me. I'm on a plane with everybody going back to Augusta. Augusta's not that big of a town. Do you know how many people I knew on that plane coming back? Zippo. Well, that's not true. I knew one. My wife. I didn't know Marcia. Yeah. She knew me. It was good. But I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I don't know any of these people. They live in my area, in my region. They may have lived in South Carolina or whatever. I understand our region's getting a little bigger. But the fact is, there's all these people, and all of them are made in the image and likeness of God. They've got a reason why they're getting on those planes. They got a reason why they're on that car. Do you ever look at I-20 sometimes and you're thinking if the people going this way would just do the things that the people going that way were doing, that we wouldn't have to be wasting all this time on the interstate. But everybody has something they're going to do. I'm going to go visit somebody who's over there, and they're visiting somebody who lives over here, and it's like, maybe we should trade families. Anyways, and so, yeah. But all those people, they're all made in the image and likeness of God. They have something happening in their life. Some of them could be hurting. Some of them might die that day. And I don't think about that until God says, wake up! Would you please look at these people? And I'm overwhelmed by it. Could you imagine what it would be like to be Jesus? Who knew the thoughts of everybody around him? I don't know if he turned it on, turned it off, turned it on, turned it off. I don't know that. I just know that he's able to do it. Do I want that? Not to know everybody's thoughts, but do I want to know, do I really care to know what they're going through in order that I might what? Get involved. Because that's the next step that happens, right? Jesus what? He gets involved. And he gets involved in, we're shrinking this part of it, but he gets involved with a command. Okay? And he brings this command to the son. And so I want you to think about what he does at this moment. He sees the situation. He has splanketsamai for the widow, and he does something outlandish, unheard of, anathema to the people of Israel. What does he do? He puts his hand on the bier, on the coffin. He touches the dead guy. For him to touch a dead body is to make himself what? Unclean. But what happens whenever Jesus touches something that's unclean? It becomes clean. Isn't that kind of cool? And so he commands. This isn't a request. This is a command. It's in the imperative mood. He tells the young man a command. I think it's what? You go to a dead person and command them. See what they do to you, you know? And he commands this dead kid to rise up. And instantly, the young man obeys. I can't even imagine what's going on in the Widow of Nain's mind at this moment. I can't imagine what's going on in all the other people who are around. I can't imagine what's going on in the disciples who are looking at Jesus going, what are you doing? Well, I guess he touched the leper, you know. And so we're watching this whole thing play out, and it's all happening. Boom, 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 boom. Sit up, you know, and he gets up. Do you believe that Jesus has the power to raise the dead? Now, I'm not saying he's going to do that today. Okay, I'm not of that stripe where we're going to be praying for someone to. However, people do come back from the what? From the dead. We have those stories. Okay, he could do that. That someone could theoretically be stated by the medical community to have died, and he could rise them up if he chose to do that. Okay. But more importantly, as in Sunday school, we're starting to study 1 Thessalonians and then 2 Thessalonians. The core of our belief is that one day, what's going to happen? The dead will rise. Do you get it? That Jesus has the authority at that moment to say what? Do you ever wonder how the rapture happens? Someone in heaven, the Father or the Son, probably says what? It's time! And instantly, we're going to obey. Isn't that something? That tells you that you got a transformed body. Because if Jesus was told the whole church to do something now, we'd probably all go, oh no! But we're going to be dead, and at that moment, we're going to be obedient. Jesus had the power in that moment to command a dead man to rise up. The dead man heard him, which is amazing, and he rose from the dead. What do you believe that God is able to do in your life? So, in the end, how much compassion do you have for those around you? If you were Jesus, would you even be looking at the widow? Or would you be saying, I cannot believe I'm traveling along and now I get a funeral procession running at 25 miles an hour that I get stuck behind? Or would you be thinking about and praying for the people who are sitting in that car that's driving behind the hearse because they're hurting? I've been on both sides of that. There have been times I've been praying for those individuals, and there's other times when I've been what? Frustrated that these people who are having this loss are interrupting my plans? Are you willing to go out of your way to help or assist others? Jesus did. How would Jesus describe your faith? He was wild and shocked with the centurion, not so much with the people around him. Do you realize it was the religious people that Jesus usually rebuked? Again, I have to ask, who would I be if I was back in that day? Would I be the ones being rebuked? Or would I be the ones being commended? Is your faith evident to those who are around you? If we would put out a survey, not to you, but to those who are around you, and ask those people how they would describe you, would you come out as a Christ follower? Would you come out as a blank? Oops. I'm going the wrong way now. Oh well. Is there a need to change the way you think and therefore change the way you act? Let's pray. Father, thank you for your goodness to us. Thank you for your love, your mercy, your grace. Thank you for your tender mercies and compassion, which are new every day. You care for us, Lord. You know the situation that we're in, better than we even know the situation that we're in. And you told us to cast our care upon you, for you care for us. And yet I see that even with the widow of Nain, she didn't have to do that. You just interceded on your own and took care of the need. Lord, I pray that we would be as compassionate as the centurion was to his doulos, and that we would be faithful enough, as the centurion was, to take those needs to you. Lord, that we would understand the concept of authority, and that we would submit to your authority in all things, that we might represent you, that we might reflect you to this world that you have allowed us the privilege of living in. For we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going to end with "To God Be the Glory." It's number 56 in your hymnal.